Well, welcome in, everyone. Another edition of the Ferrario Face-Off here at Claibs Online. I'm Alex Ferrario, pre- and post-game host for the St. Louis Blues. And, of course, I got my good buddy Mike Claiborne with us to talk about a couple of Blues games that we've officially wrapped up. And, Claibs, I'm glad we're talking today because if you and I would have talked Saturday or Sunday, I would have been a lot different person compared to what we were after last night's victory.
Well, you know what? You're not by yourself on that. I think that there are a lot of people who felt that way. But here's the thing: the good news is it's behind us,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a good learning tool for the Blues to let them know that they're going to have to be more consistent, like every team. And before you and I started talking about this on our podcast, I think, Alex, we're going to see a lot of nights like this around the league. There are some teams that just won't be ready. And there are going to be some teams that are going to take advantage of it, especially when you got the 2-2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you make adjustments quicker. It's almost like the playoff mentality where, okay, we're going to play these guys best of 5 or best of 7 series. And those first 2 games of a series, you see the adjustments take place. This one just goes from a bad second game to turning it into a good first game against the San Jose team, which, by the way, let's not confuse the Blues with the 76 Flyers here or the 77 Canadians. They weren't flawless last night, but they seem like they found a niche. They took advantage of a San Jose team that's got some experience when you think about Carlson and Brett Burns and a couple of other players that they have. But they're still young and they're still trying to find their way, just like everybody else.
You know, I felt like, Claibs, it was the tale of two cities, the start of the book on Wednesday and Friday. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Yeah.
The part that I tell you what, I'm going to be really intrigued by, and I want to get into that baseball series that you mentioned, but I'm going to be intrigued by the other team's first opportunities of playing in Colorado because I talked about this on the post game.
Yeah.
The Blues had 0 preseason games. They had 1 week of a training camp. Now, these guys were in condition before training camp started, but you cannot prepare for a game in Colorado with that altitude. Nonetheless, you can't compare for a game in Colorado with the altitude on 2 games in 3 days when you're locked in a hotel room. So I think other teams are going to suffer from what the Blues suffered on Wednesday and Friday.
Well, I think it's a distinct advantage. I don't think there's any question about it. And the earlier you play them, the more challenging it's going to be. And anybody who will tell you when you play in altitude, you don't really feel it until the day after or the day after the day after. And not to make excuses for the Blues, but they just were not a cohesive team. They didn't have any jump, and maybe that had something to do with it. And then once they lost their momentum, it was just, let's just hurry up and get this thing over with and get out of here is what we saw.
Well, then what do you think of these baseball series, Claibs? Because I think this is an interesting dynamic that we're going to see this season. I don't expect to see a lot of series sweeps in the 56-game schedule, mostly because you know that in your division, you're looking at an 8-point swing if you lose 2 games that can put you out of the playoffs. And I think you're going to see teams respond much like we saw with the Colorado Avalanche of, hey, we got to be better than this. The other team's going to be less prepared for that second game, and that's where there's going to be some faults that go into it.
Well, you're right. And I think the other thing that comes into this is coaching and making sure you don't give a team too much information, because you're going from one game to another. You find 4 or 5, half a dozen plays. Hey, boys, we need to be conscious of this, and let's make sure this guy doesn't drop down anymore. Little things that you can adjust on the fly compared to trying to give them a bunch of statistics that necessarily won't really mesh with them in that short period of time. So you've got a coaching element. You've also got a conditioning element on how do you take that off day and what do you do with it? Is it a maintenance day? Is it a light workout day? Is it just a classroom day, a Zoom day? And I think as the season goes on, you're going to have different teams that are going to have a different approach. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Winning 2 is going to be challenging unless you run into a rash of injuries, unless you run into a team that just has lost focus. Maybe they're out on a road trip for a while and they can't wait to get back home. So they kind of mail in that last game, which on the other side of that coin, you come home for the first time after a long road trip. That's always, in my opinion, the toughest game to win, the first game back from a long road trip. So I think we're going to have to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of this whole season because some of these things you're going to take into the playoffs, and some of these things you just want to just take to the trash can because they're not going to help.
Right, and you saw that immediately Friday. I mean, they brushed that off as quick as possible, and they opened up with that game last night on Monday and just kind of put it all out there as fast as possible. And I'm going to be intrigued too, Claibs, if the NHL decides to keep this baseball series format throughout the moving into the near future. I think this is a smart decision in terms of, one, recouping the financial losses that you've gone through with this pandemic and how much money they've had to spend with the pause and no fans in the building. But two, I think this is something that the players are really going to enjoy and fans can get behind, because even if it's an 82-game schedule, Claibs, and it's 6 games against your division, 2 games against the Eastern Conference, teams get to remember these storylines. Fans remember the storylines, and if you're doing these baseball series formats, I think it could make these NHL seasons a lot more enjoyable in the dog days, as they like to call it.
Yeah, I think it will. I think there's a lot of good you can take from it. The fact you're in a city longer than 24 hours, and when we get back to being able to go out for a walk or a coffee or go have a good dinner in a place,
right.
Again, it's kind of like the old playoff format where you spend more than a day in a city. I think that has a plus to it, and it also harbors ill feelings toward the opposition.
Yeah.
So fans will say, "Boy, you see what happened in the third period of that last game? Man, I might want to go back and see this next game," because hockey players have very interesting memories about things that they want to take over into the next game. And I think also, Alex, what it's going to do is force general managers to maybe add a little bit of more toughness to their lineup. Where teams won't take liberties with you. Now, the Blues are in pretty good shape because they've got a guy like Kyle Clifford. Las Vegas is in good shape because they've got Ryan Reeves. And if you look around the league, look at the guys who can make people accountable. Every team doesn't have that. You have some teams that want to play on the honor system. Well, I got news for you. The honor system goes out of the window as soon as the puck is dropped. So you're going to see teams make roster adjustments to make sure they can protect themselves, especially on the road. But overall, I like the concept. Maybe you do it as you expand the schedule next year and find different markets you can do that in, kind of like what I would term interleague play.
Yeah.
Where, you go and play in the American League and you play that team at home and on the road. Maybe you pick a division that you do that with every year. So that means you may only see another division maybe one time a year instead of twice a year. But I think you can be really creative about it and create some more inner rivalries, I think. So far, so good. And I commend the NHL for thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that one, Claibs. So let's look at some of these games. I want to touch on a couple of aspects in these 3 games so far, Claibs. And let's start with Justin Falk, because I think he's going to be the hot talking point after Monday's victory where he scored 2 goals. This is a guy, he's been on the ice, Claibs, for some goals against. He's been on the ice for some goals for. But more importantly, I think Justin Falk is starting to look more like the Justin Falk that Doug Armstrong thought he acquired from Carolina, rather than the Justin Falk that they had last year, mainly because he has a place on this team. He's playing with Scandella. He's on the right side. He feels a part of this roster, whereas last season, he didn't feel a part of the team. And it's no disrespect or no blame to the Blues, but when you're celebrating a Stanley Cup championship and you're the only one on that roster that wasn't a part of the team, it's hard to feel that camaraderie that you want to feel in a hockey game season.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Alex. He was not part of the team for those reasons you just mentioned. And let's throw this into the equation too. His minutes have been sculpted differently this year. Pietrangelo ate up a lot of ice last year, okay? So he and Torrey Krug are going to get more of that ice. Scandella is the perfect defense partner for him, a little bit more of a stay-at-home guy. Falk has some offensive skill. We just haven't seen a lot of it. I will say this, 2 things. One, he is the master of the 5-foot pass.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not a home run passer, okay? At least he hasn't shown it. And 2, sometimes the way he skates, it looks like he got a brand new pair of skates and they didn't get sharpened.
Right.
They're right out of the box and he's skating and he's feeling good. Wait a minute, there's no edge on these skates. and it seems like he's kind of, it looks like, and he's a good skater.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't seem like he's getting anywhere. And I think that's kind of put the onus on fans to make him more noticeable. And he's been the whipping boy. Let's face it. In the brief time he's been here, he's been the whipping boy to a patient Blues fandom, where they haven't just started booing the guy or anything like that. But I mean, if you go back, you think about a Barrett Jackman, who assumed that role for a while, where Blues fans couldn't think he could do anything right.
Eric Brewer, remember Claibs?
Eric Brewer was another guy. Now Brewer got blamed because of the fact they traded Boughner for him.
Right.
But you make a great point about the fact that he was never really accepted until maybe his second or third year.
Yeah.
And I think with Falk, he's kind of gone through that. And as you touch on the fact he's the only guy without a ring, and people kind of say, yeah, you're one of us, but you're really not part of what we did. So it's taking time. But here's the thing that I think is very important. You're going to have some scoring from your defense. So you figure Krug is going to score. Parayko's going to score. You think Vince Dunn's got a guy who can score. So now you got three guys that probably haven't been known for scoring, and Gunnarsson, who will score the occasional goal. Scandella, we just haven't seen enough of. And then there's Falk, who had scoring prowess when he was with Carolina. So you hope he can give you a little bit more of a push in that regard, where he's just not out there for 35 seconds just to make sure we can get to the next 35 seconds and not be able to be productive offensively.
And I'll tell you what Falk brings, Claibs, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well. And this is with Torrey Krug now and Jordan Kyrou especially. There's a speed factor to this team that they haven't had for a really long time. They've always been that heavy David Backes, Patrick Berglund style hockey. That's how they won the cup. But they still can play heavy, but now they've implemented the speed into their game. And I mean, the fact that you have a Justin Falk who is jumping up into the rush and playing as a forward. You have Torrey Krug, who got an assist on Monday, his first point as a Blue. And maybe he's not finding the back of the net like people expect him to be, but he's creating offense. Jordan Kyrou creating offense. I think this is an identity that Craig Berube can have a lot of success with, because if you stay to that status quo, the identity of the defensive first, but you add and implement the offensive mindedness, I think it creates an awful lot of opportunities for the Blues. It's just a matter of making sure you maintain both sides of it.
Well, I'm going to take you back a few years, and I'll just ask the question. You show me a great offensive defenseman, I'll show you a good defense partner who always covered the back door. And I'll go back to Bobby Orr. You had Dallas Smith. You think about Paul Coffey and all the good defensemen he played with that were defensive minded. And we saw it here with Chris Pronger, and Al McInnes. They had guys that covered the back door where they could jump into plays. And I think with these groups of defensemen we have now, we have a similar mix where maybe Scandella stays back. Maybe Gunnarsson stays back. Maybe Bortuzzo stays back. Capable to do some things offensively, but they are defense first, second, and third compared to the Krugs and some of the other Parayko guys like that who can jump up into play. And it's an age-old way of doing it in hockey, where if you're going to play that up-style hockey and that defenseman's got to jump up, you got to make sure you got a guy that's back to cover in case there's an odd man rush. And I think we're starting to see that develop now with this Blues defense core.
I will say, Claibs, if I'm finding a negative right now, and look, the penalty kill is one of those negatives majorly, but I think the penalty kill kind of ties into the Blues defensive overall. I talked with you, I remember before the season started, and I said chemistry is going to be one intriguing factor of this season of how fast that they can implement that. What we're seeing from the Blues, allowing 8 goals against the Avalanche, allowing 4 goals against the Sharks in their first game of the series, I think that's still kind of the learning curve of, okay, how does this guy like to play? Okay, we need to make sure we clear the puck, because frankly, the 2 guys that ate up the most time for you in your own zone were Jay Bouwmeester and Alex Pietrangelo. And if you think about it, their pairing partners both have new guys this season. Colton Parayko, who's used to playing with a Jay Bouwmeester, he was always paired up with a Jay Bouwmeester, and now he's got Torrey Krug. And then if you think about Alex Pietrangelo, who spent a majority of his time playing with a Carl Gunnarsson or a Vince Dunn, those guys have new pairings, and Falk and, of course, Scandella. So you got 6 guys on the ice that really are trying to learn how every tendency is going to be. I think the defense is going to tighten itself up as the season goes along, but it's definitely an area, at least of the early portion of the season, that needs to get tightened up.
Well, it goes back to this. It goes back to comfort level, camaraderie, the bonding element that the Blues and everybody else in the National Hockey League doesn't have. I mean, one of the great things about hockey, you hear all the bonding stories and guys, it'd be 20 guys going to dinner at the same place and things that they can't do that. When they're on the road, they can't even go out for a coffee. You can't even go for a walk.
You're going to the hotel lobby.
Exactly. And the fact that you still have to talk and you have to do it not necessarily always in the heat of battle, but making sure that you have some sort of time to kind of get a feel for what this person likes doing or what do they see.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in that situation? Tell me what you're seeing. And in that way, we know we're on the same page compared to you seeing one thing and me seeing another. And the only time you talk about it is after they're fishing the puck out of your net and you're going back to the bench asking what happened. So you've got to make sure you find those moments where you can communicate. But I think the key here is patience and letting them grow together. Now, I'm not worried about the penalty killing unit because they're going to figure it out. And the same thing for the power play unit. We thought, and you and I have talked about this, where we thought we had two legitimate power play units. Well, we haven't gotten much out of it yet because I still think there's two things they're doing. They're not communicating as much as they normally would because of the current environment that they're in. And because they're trying to respect each other so much that they're making that one extra pass too many. They're throwing it where they thought you should be instead of where you need to be. And once they start to narrow that gap, you'll see a little bit more cohesiveness from the unit and the individuals in knowing, oh, I can make this blind pass knowing he's going to be there. Or I can cycle in the corner knowing he's going to pick it up. There are a lot of things that we'll see over time, especially on the power play and knowing who's going to be on the weak side. So when everybody's overloaded to one side, I got to have that one guy to stand on the weak side, getting in the dirty area, looking for some loose change and getting the rebounds and scoring goals that way. I said this earlier today. This is a hockey team that cannot score on the perimeter. They got to have some volunteers to get in a trench and really take a cross check or whatever the case is, create obstructions and be able to be in a position to score a 3-foot goal because they're not going to have a lot of space. Once we find out who those volunteers are, then they're going to be fine. So, again, patience comes down to a key. I understand it's 56 games, but everybody's dealing with it.
Well, and look, the other part that I want to get into with you, Claibs, is the goaltending and Jordan Binnington. And look, this was a guy that was put on a second tier of goaltenders coming into this season, mostly because of recency bias of watching what happened in that bubble play. I think Binnington has been one of the brightest spots of this team in the early portion. Now, look, he's given up 9 goals in 3 games. That's not great. He was pulled in that Avalanche game after 2 periods. But the way I look at it is the games that have gotten out of hand, Binnington's been left out to dry. The games that they've needed him, that first one against Colorado, the second and third period against the San Jose Sharks on Monday night, he's come up with the big plays. And I don't need to have a goaltender who's posting Marty Brodeur numbers at goals against and save percentage. I need a goaltender that makes the big time saves when the biggest moments of the games are in his hands. And if I'm going off of the first 3 games of the season, Binnington has done that in 2 of those.
Well, in Binnington's case, here's what I expect of my goaltender. Okay, the routine save where he gets a look, I expect that save to be made.
Right.
But there's going to be at least 1, if not 2, legitimate scoring opportunities that you have to be batting 500 and make at least one of those saves, if not both. And that's because maybe you got hung out to dry by your defenseman. Maybe a forward didn't come back. Maybe somebody forgot to pick up the guy on the doorstep. There's so many things that go into that. And that's when you are needed more than anything else, making that save, giving your team a chance compared to just, looking at the scoreboard and shaking your head and, all the things that goaltenders do when they know they've been had and it wasn't their fault. So in this case, I agree with you. I think that the outcome of these games would be significantly different had he not been sharp. And there were some goals that nobody was going to stop because they were too wide open. I like his mechanics. There's still a couple little things I think he's still got to be conscious of. Glove hand position, not having your arm out too much where you give up that shot in between your ribs and your elbow. He's good at the 5-hole. Doesn't give up many there. And he's got a good solid glove hand. He keeps it out in front. where he's getting a good look at it going in. So he mechanically is okay. He's going to have a goal that's going to be given up that he wish he could have back. But for the most part, I think you make a good point where he's kept them in games until they were able to find their sea legs, with the exception of the Colorado game where nobody really showed up for that other than him.
All right, Clays, before we wrap up, you and I have to talk about this. This is going to be the educating Ferrario portion of the Face-Off with Ferrario. You put a tweet out on Monday night saying Craig Berube and Steve Ott versus Rocky Thompson and Bob Boughner, of course, the coaching staff with the San Jose Sharks. Tough guys versus tough guys. Personally, Craig Berube scares the hell out of me. Steve Ott,
even to this day.
Yeah, even on Zoom calls, and he stares at me, Clays. I'm a little nervous talking to him. But apparently I don't know much about Bob Boughner and Rocky Thompson, because these two apparently, I don't know if Craig Berube and Steve Ott would be an easy win.
No, well, the boogeyman, that's what they used to call him when he was in Buffalo in Florida. He was willing. He was a tough customer, defenseman. Yeah. Rocky Thompson made his bones in the minors where he was just Mr. Rough and Tumble. Mm-hmm. Kind of built like a fire hydrant, had this long curly hair, and he would throw these big roundhouse left hooks. He was a tough competitor. And I think what we're going to do from this point on, Alex, is for every team that comes in, look at their coaching staff. There's normally a guy that played in the National Hockey League. So we're going to see if our coaches can handle their coaches, and that'll be our plus minus of the night, to see if we can figure that out. I'm just old enough to remember these guys when they played. So you'll get an education as well as some of our listeners. It was funny, though, today as Cam Jansen chimed in, and he and I were having a good time with it, and Cam knows all these guys too. And we were laughing about the fact that, Rocky Thompson was a left-hander. And I don't know if anybody's ever put it on record or not, but I'm telling you, lefties always get the best of these guys, because these guys are normally setting up right-handed, thinking everybody's right-handed. They never see that left hand coming, and by the time they do, it's too late. So if you're a good fighter, the good ones know whether you're lefty or righty, and they know all your tendencies, where you like to grab here or grab by the sleeve of the sweater. And it's fun to sit and watch that. Unfortunately, we see more of that. We have a better chance of the coaches going than we have the players. I remember a couple of years ago when Berube first got the job, I made the point that Craig Berube in one season had more penalty minutes than half the Blues roster, if not the whole Blues roster. I mean, it's just changed. Now, he and Steve Ott, I remember, because I was telling Otter, I said, you and Berube have more penalty minutes in one season than the whole roster in that room does. And he just made the point, that's just the way the nature of the game works. Right. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it is what it is.
Well, I'll tell you this, that Winnipeg series, what was it, after game one, when Berube basically stopped mid-ice and looked and called out the Winnipeg Jets team? At that point, Claibs, I'm like, can we suit up Craig Berube and put him on the ice for the Blues?
Well, you know what, Alex, I tell you, and I'm sure you've seen the old highlights of John Winsek tonight. He challenged the Minnesota North Star bench. And the funniest part about it was not one North Star made eye contact with Winsek. They were either looking at their skates, trying to see if they were tired, or looking up at the scoreboard. Nobody was making eye contact with Winsek. And that's kind of what happened with Berube, because as we know, he's a very mild-mannered person. But if you push that button, or as Ken Hitchcock would say, he pushed the wrong button, open the door, it may not bode well. But I think the Chief, his composure is one that he leaves the fighting to somebody else now.
I'll tell you this one, Claibs. We had Bruce Boudreau on one of our pregame shows a couple nights ago. Of course, the former NHL.
Now the NHL network, right?
Yeah, he was with Minnesota last year. And I asked him, I said, what makes Craig Berube so good at his job on the bench? And Boudreau chuckled, and he paused, and he goes, well, for one thing, I'm sure every one of his players are scared to death of him.
You're damn right they should be.
Always brings out the best of your players when you're afraid to go back to the bench with Craig Berube. But I'll tell you, he frightens me just as much as when he's excited, when he's happy, than when he's angry. Like, it seems it's the same guy all the time.
Well, I'll take my chances of him being happy. Being angry, he might forget, and then we're all in trouble. So
he might black out.
Exactly. He might have, like sharks, where they have that membrane that covers their eyes when they're about to get into battle. So if we see him go that route, then he's all yours.
That's a great analysis. Well, Claibs, man, this is always fun getting to do a little Ferrario face-off with you. We'll probably be back later on this week after the Blues. I know they play Wednesday against the San Jose Sharks. They open up a series with the Kings on Saturday, Sunday at Enterprise Center. So plenty more to get into in this 56-game schedule. Claibs, I'm looking forward to doing it with you and can't wait to get into some postseason action as we continue on down the road.
All right, man. Have a great one, and let's go Blues.
There we go. That's Mike. Go ahead. That's Mike Claiborne. I'm Alex Ferrario, and that's going to wrap it up with the Ferrario Face-Off here at Claibs Online. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.